Hello, welcome back to online class Discipleship. Discipleship. Today we are going to study discipleship in pre-Christianity. Discipleship in pre-Christianity. Particularly we will look Old Testament and the first century discipleship. So first of all, let's see the 5 essential elements in discipleship. 5 essential elements in discipleship. Number 1, relationship to nurture. Relationship to nurture. Number 2, apprenticeship for competence. Apprenticeship for competence. That means learning for competence. And number 3, accountability for task. Accountability for task. And number 4, submissions for shaping. Submission for shaping. And number 5, wisdom for decision making. Wisdom for decision making. These 5 patterns or elements are essentially involved in the task of discipleship in the pre-Christianity. First, let us see the Greco-Roman world. Historians agree that Greece was the birthplace of Western civilization. Greece was the birthplace of Western civilization. Plato's Republic described the foundation of democracy, and when he thinks of philosophy, we immediately recall Socrates' teaching techniques and methods, and also Aristotle's articulations of theories. In the first century, the Apostle Paul stood amongst hearers at the city of Athens and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. I even found an altar with these inscriptions, to unknown God. Now what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you." We can see in Acts chapter 17 verses 22 and 23. Paul's speech demonstrates that the Greek philosophers were confused about God, but they were also astute in passing on their confusions as they lived out discipleship and even create some of its language and technique. The Greek master's use of mathetes or disciple, as we can see in the first class, is translated disciples. We can find the concept of disciple, a person following a master, among the great masters of Greece. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Herodotus all use disciple to mean learner or one who is a diligent student. All the Greek philosophers and the great masters, they all agree and generally understood that the disciples' life involved apprenticeship, a relationship of submissions, and a life of demanding training. A life of demanding training. In other words, all these great masters agree there are 5 essential elements in discipleship. They are relationship to nurture, apprenticeship for competence or learning for competence, and accountability for task, and submission for shaping, wisdom for decisions. All these 5 elements are essentially involved in the task of discipleship. So let us see these 5 elements in the life of Moses and Joshua. How Joshua learned from Moses to be a leader as a disciple of Moses. Let us look on this. The first point is relationship to nurture. Moses needed a lot of encouragement because he faced great and demanding tasks. With the help of his brother Aaron and his father-in-law Jethro and the help of many others, he managed and he obeyed God and rescued the people of God from Egypt. When Moses went up to the mountains to meet with God, he took Joshua as his aide. We can see in Exodus chapter 24 verse 13, from that time forward, Joshua served by Moses' side. So we can see that in this discipleship between Moses and Joshua, we can see relationship to nurture. And the second point is learning for competence or apprenticeship for competence. From the time of the visit with God through many personal and organizational crises, Joshua observed and learned how to lead these difficult and stubborn people in the challenging circumstances. Even when the leader is filled with self-doubt. So Joshua learned to lead difficult peoples in challenging circumstances, even when the leader is filled with self-doubt. Joshua saw Moses slam the tablets to the ground. He saw Moses make mistakes, such as striking the rock for water rather than speaking to it in a trusting way of God. At the same time, he listened outside Moses' tent and heard the cries of his mentor pleading with God to show mercy on his people. But throughout all these hard circumstances, Joshua learned to be a good disciple of Moses. And Joshua learned to trust in God and to lead these people. So the third point is accountability for task. Moses' task seemed simple: to take out the people of Israel from Egypt and to lead them to the promised land, the land of Canaan. Yet, it was a daunting one, very difficult one. By administrating much of the work, Joshua learned the daily grind of managing 2 million people. Moses was accountable to his task, and Joshua learned how to be accountable to the task. And number 4, submission for shaping. Joshua remained faithful to God and to his master Moses. Even when he faced pressure from others close to him to go along with various disagreements. When Moses' sister and brothers, Miriam and Aaron, rebelled, when the people demand meat rather than manna, the bread, when conflict arose over Moses' new wife, and when all the 10 spies reported that entering the land of Canaan, entering the land of promise would be too dangerous. In all these circumstances, Joshua has been faithful to God and to Moses. Joshua's submission to Father and to his master Moses shaped him to be a man of strong faith and character. Number 5, wisdom for decision making. God selected Joshua to replace Moses because Joshua was ready. God chose him. Moses trained him. And then God anointed him. We can see in Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 38 and 31 verses 1 to 30. Moses encouraged Joshua. He told Joshua to be very strong and courageous, for you will bring the Israelites into the land of promise. And I myself will be with you. Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 23. Joshua then crossed the Jordan River, took the city of Ai, and conquered the 5 kings of that regions, and went on to capture the entire land of Canaan. renewed the covenant, divided the land among the 12 tribes, and faithfully served until the Lord gave Israel rest from her enemies. Here we can see the influence of Moses upon Joshua, and we can also see the influence of Joshua upon the leaders of Israel. In the epilogue of the book of Joshua, Joshua's name was specifically underlined. We can read, Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord has done for Israel. We can see in Joshua chapter 24 verse 31. So briefly we can see these 5 essential elements in Moses' discipleship upon Joshua. Joshua have a good relationship and to nurture his leadership role, and Joshua learned for his competence. He learned from Moses and he learned from the difficult conditions, and he developed his competencies. And we can see Moses was accountable in his task, and Joshua learned how to be accountable in task. And we can see the submissions of Joshua both to God and to his master Moses. He always at the side of Moses. Sometimes even Moses' brothers and sisters Miriam and Aaron rebelled against Moses. The people of Israel rebelled against Moses. A lot of complaints and critics from the people. But throughout these conditions, Joshua was at the side of Moses. And when the 12 spies were sent to the land of Canaan, only Joshua and Caleb have a positive response, having faith in God, trusting in the power of God. But the other 10 spies, they said to enter the promised land is too dangerous. They have a negative report. But Joshua was still faithful to God and to his master Joshua. This is learning through submissions. So submission for shaping. That means his submission shaped his life to be a man of faith, to be a man of character, and to be a good leader. And finally, we can see wisdom for decision making. Joshua learned from Moses in making decisions in a difficult time or a hard time. So now once again, let us briefly look at the 5 characteristics of first century discipleships. In the first century, in the lifetime of Jesus, we can see different types of discipleship. Like the Pharisees' discipleship, rabbinical discipleship, the Jewish and the Greek, the Jewish discipleships and the Greeks' discipleship. We can see different kinds of schools and different kinds of discipleship. So we can briefly summarize all these types into these 5 categories. Now let us briefly look at the 5 characteristics of first century discipleship. 5 characteristics of the first century discipleship. We can see number 1, deciding to follow a teacher. Deciding to follow a teacher. And number 2, memorizing the teacher's word. Memorizing the teacher's word. And number 3, learning the teacher's way of ministry. Learning the teacher's way of ministry. And number 4, imitating teacher's life and character. Imitating teacher's life and character. Finally, number 5, raising up their own disciples. Raising up their own disciple. We can see these 5 essential characters in the first century discipleships. So let's see the first point, deciding to follow a teacher. Deciding to follow a teacher. Young men could join a variety of schools each led by a rabbi or a teacher. In some cases, students chose their teacher, and of course, teacher could accept or reject a student's application. If a young man had not achieved a certain academic and social status by the time of his age 13, he would instead choose a life of farming, fishing, carpentry, and other vocational jobs. This is the first century way of life. The fact that Jesus and his followers were laborers explains why the religious establishment didn't accept them. The disciples of first century Judaism learned everything from his teachers. He learned his teacher's story, his life habit, how to keep the Sabbath his way, and his interpretations of the Torah. And when a disciple learned everything his teacher knew, then he taught his own disciples. A disciple's commitment to follow his teachers lies at the heart of the transformational process. So there is a process. Every disciple must make a commitment of submission to at least one other person. Without this relational dimension, everything that follows is weakened. The teacher-disciple relationship creates a powerful bond that is at least as important and often more crucial than the father-son relationship. First century discipleship was expressed as a servant-master relationship we can see in Matthew chapter 10 verse 24. Once accepted as a disciple, a young man started as a beginner or termite who sat in the back of the room and could not speak. So this is the first process of discipleship. Then he became a distinguished student who took an independent line in his approach or questioning. At the next level, he became a disciple associate who sat immediately behind the rabbi during prayer times. Finally, he achieved the highest level, a disciple of the wise, and he was recognized as the intellectual equal of his rabbi. These are the process. So these are important elements included in deciding to follow a teacher. Number 2, memorizing the teacher's word. Memorizing the teacher's word. Oral tradition provided the basic way of study. Disciples learned the teacher's word verbatim to pass along to the next person. Often the disciples learned as many as 4 interpretations of each major passage in the Torah. So memorizing system was one major method in the first century discipleship. So usually every day the disciple have to memorize some pages of Torah, 4 interpretations of each major passage in the Torah. Number 3, learning the teacher's way of ministry. Learning the teacher's way of ministry. A disciple learned how his teacher kept God's commands, including how he practiced the Sabbath, fast, pray, and said blessings in ceremonial situations. He learned everything from his teacher. And a disciple also learned his rabbi's teaching methods and the many traditions his master followed. Number 4, imitating teachers' life and character. Imitating teachers' life and character. Jesus said that when a disciple is fully taught, he will be like his teacher. We can see in Luke chapter 6, verse 40. The highest calling of a disciple was to imitate his teacher. The highest calling of a disciple was to imitate his teachers. Therefore, the meaning of disciple, Methodist, emphasized to follow or to imitate the master. Paul called on Timothy to follow his example. We can see in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 10 to 14. And he didn't hesitate to call on all believers to do the same as he did. We can see in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 14 to 16, 11 and 1. Philippians chapter 4 verse 9. As I imitate Christ, imitate me. As I follow Jesus Christ, follow me. So he was encouraging and challenging all believers, and he called also to Timothy to follow his example. So finally, we can see the final characteristic is raising up their own disciple. Raising up their own disciple. When a disciple finished his training, he was expected to reproduce what he had learned by finding and training his own apprentice. He would start his own school and call it after his name, such as the House of Hillel. These 5 characteristics describe the institutions of discipleship as practiced in the first century. Jesus used this practice with his closest followers. When he called on them to make disciples, he expected them to find others who would make the 5 commitments. When he said, teach them to obey everything I have commanded you, in Matthew chapter 28 verse 20, they knew the task would require the kinds of dedication found in the 5 commitments. They knew the task would require the kind of dedication found in the 5 commitments. Of course, some questions now cried out for an answer. What would this look like for us now? If these characteristics describe what Jesus meant by make disciples, should we practice discipleship the same way? How common is this kind of discipleship in the contemporary church? We have to think all these questions. So today in this class, we learned the characteristic of discipleship in pre-Christianity. Particularly, we learned from the Greek teachers like Aristotle and Socrates, Plato, how they make disciples in their age. So we can see the patterns and the system, the methods, how they make disciples. So making disciples was the techniques. And secondly, we can see the 5 characteristics of discipleship in Old Testament. We study the examples of Moses and Joshua. Joshua learned from Moses. And Moses made relationship with Joshua, with his brother Aaron, and with Jethro to nurture his leadership role. And we can see Moses was accountable to his task, and Joshua learned how to accountable to his task. And we can see Joshua's submissions to God and also to his master Moses. And we can see learning wisdom, obtaining wisdom. And finally, we can see obtaining wisdom for decision making. Joshua was influenced by Moses, and Joshua learned from Moses. Joshua obtained the wisdom, the divine wisdom from Moses, And Joshua was influential to the people of Israel and the elders of Israel. And we also learned the 5 characteristics of first century discipleship. And we also learned the 5 characteristics of first century discipleship. They are deciding to follow a teacher, memorizing the teacher's word, and learning the teacher's way of ministry, imitating teacher's life and character, and raising up their own disciples. These are the important characteristics, crucial characteristics of first century discipleships. So we stopped our class here today, and God bless you all. Thank you. See you in next class. God bless you.